Thank you all. Very pleased to be here. As you know, for better part of my life, I've been a professor. So very happy to be at a college, indeed, not at any college, but a leading college. Lots and lots of your predecessors now work where I work. So I know a lot about you, but I've come here for the first time to this campus. All right, so today what I'm going to do is, it's not a technical talk as we normally do in the classrooms, but instead talk on the Indian economy, and I'm going to take a bit of historical perspective. But we will be analytic. So your skills and your training in economics is going to be tested. And let's see, when you ask questions, I'll find out whether you have grasped the analytics or not. All right. So I think let's start with. Okay. So let's start. I think what I'm going to do is, as I said, take a historical perspective, and first just use this one single slide to summarize a lot of the economic history of India. What this slide does is to show the evolution of per capita income in real terms, so corrected for inflation. So this is real per capita GDP from 1950-51 all the way to 2013-14. But what it does do is to normalize the income in the first year, initially at 50-51 at 100. So you can, if you want to think in terms of real rupees, you can think of this as 100 rupees per week kind of per capita income. But if you understand, I'm sure all of you must understand the concept of indexing things. So the income, real per capita income is indexed at 100 in 50-51, and when we, for the remaining about 64 years, we track the path of the per capita income. Go all the way to, let's say, 30 years later, 1980-81. The per capita income rises from 100 to 151. This is a very, very gradual rise. Over a 30-year period, what we did was to add about 51 to the original income of 100. It's very, very slow growth during this period, and you'll see, I'll give you later growth rates, exactly at what rate the GDP was growing, and then of course you will correct for population growth to get to per capita income growth. Now, the next decade, the 1980s decade, by 1991 you go to 206. So approximately, I'll just use the approximate number here. You add another 50 in the next 10 years. So that's quite an acceleration, if you will. Actually, what took us in the first 30 years, we were able to do then in the next 10 years. So the first 30 we added about 50 to the per capita income using rounded figures. The next 50 we were able to add in just 10 years. Then you take the next 10 and approximately you have added about 100. So you in a 10-year period for the first time, we managed to add another 100. So yes, further acceleration in the rise in per capita income. And then you take from there on to 2013-14, and what you have been able to do is add about 300 to that income. Now take a bit a longer view, take the first 50 years altogether, and In the first 50 years, you have added about 100 to per capita income. 200 to per capita income in the first 50 years, up to 2000, 2001, you go from 100 to 295, so I'll take the 300 as the figure. You add 200, and then in the next 14 years you add actually 300, so 1.5 times within a 14-year period of what we added to per capita income in the first 50 years. So all of you are very lucky people actually, if you think about it. Those of us who lived through the earlier years, earlier decades, really had it rough in two ways. We had it rough in two ways. One, to begin with, the per capita income was incredibly low. And moreover, what was added to that per capita income in the first 30 years was also incredibly low. So you started out very poor, and by the end of it, after 3 decades, you were still, on average, very poor. Doesn't mean that everybody remained poor, but some people probably did a bit better than the others. But on average, you remained pretty poor. Whereas in your case, you already start out with, when compared to my generation, for instance, you started out a lot better off, and also then became a lot better off within a short period of time. As an aside, this is not the central theme of what I'm going to do, but just as an aside, a very interesting political implication of that in the earlier generations, because so little change happened and the change was so gradual, there was a sense of fatalism that this is how it is, this is how the country is, and so politically, our elections were fought generally on very different grounds than they are fought today. In those days, therefore, the caste and all the other things played a lot more role, and generally, the incumbent kind of came back, because the incumbent at the time being the Congress party in most parts of the country, and certainly at the national level, generally, the aspirations were not particularly high. The general assumption was that, this is how it is, and so, election in, election out, the same government would win. That changed after we really saw the accelerated growth, and I'm going to show you the numbers, but this is the last period I refer to in particular, that once the growth of this very high nature was experienced, suddenly people found out that with good policies you can change fortunes within a generation's time. And that changed the voting pattern, voting behavior quite dramatically. That today, if the governments are not performing, they generally get bundled out. And the governments that do actually deliver, do well, get rewarded by being re-elected. There's enough literature now on this. I've written some papers myself also. But today, the performance of the government, particularly in the economic front, what kind of growth they are able to deliver, all the governance matters also, has a lot of impact on how the election results turn out to be. Growth, economic performance specifically is a reasonably good predictor today of what the outcome of an election might be. It was not the case actually if you go back into the history. But in any case, that's an aside, as I said. So let me just next point out what. Sorry, I went back. Okay, so those are the growth rates, 51 to 88. So there are certain reasons why I have divided this, in certain ways. But I take the first about up to 1988, 51 to 88, and your GDP growth rate was just 3.8% per year. And that translated, once you corrected for the population growth, into it, there's 2.2% therefore, So per capita income grew only 1.6%. So that's a very, very gradual, hardly perceptible change in the fortunes of people. 88 to 2003, we go to nearly 6% and 3.8% of per capita GDP growth. And then 2003 to 12, I think that is really, until today, the fastest growing period. That is really what has, in my view, really changed the general approach of the Indian voter. It became much more aspirational, and this was the period during which we have grown, almost a tiger-like growth. If you think of some of the East Asian countries as tiger economies because they grew so rapidly over sustained periods of time. And this was a 9-year period from 2003-4 to 11-12. We grew at 8.3% on average in GDP terms and 6.7% in per capita terms, quite unprecedented. And that is what really is the period where I say that, fortunes change in just one generation. If you went back 15 years ago, even that recently, as recently as that, you find that the kinds of the vast numbers of automobiles that you see on the Delhi University campus, I mean, at least I saw while coming into the campus here, they simply did not exist. Very different geography and the general scene everywhere than what it is today. And then, of course, there is a lull in the growth rate. This is using the old growth series. We dropped for at least those 2 years, 13 and 13, 14 to 4.6%. And remember, now if you go back, for nearly 40 years, we had grown at 3.8%, and we're completely used to it. And suddenly, for these 2 years, the growth rate dips below 5%. We think it's a disaster. Right? We were so used to it at one time to a 3 to 4% growth that we hardly questioned in anything, and yet once we had seen this kind of very rapid growth, anything below 5% actually became a disaster. And today, even at 7% or so, which is currently happens to be the fastest growth among the large economies of the world, we're still not quite satisfied that we should do a bit better than 7% or 7.5%. So really, there's been a major shift in our perceptions. Now, why growth, right? I mean, obviously, we're all asking why am I trumpeting this horn of economic growth? I mean, why do I care whether I'm going rapidly or not? At the end of the day, of course, the objective really is not growth for growth's sake. It is so that it brings prosperity to vast parts of the population of the country. And in particular, if you look at all the historical discussions, debates, writings, etc., the focus in all those had been that, how can we eliminate the massive poverty of India? You can go back all the way to late 1930s when earlier discussions happened in the Congress party, and there was a planning committee appointed under the chairmanship of Pandit Nehru, which had deliberated these issues. And at the time they were beginning to feel that independence was going to come. So the central question they were discussing was, once we become independent, how exactly are we going to plan so as to eliminate the massive poverty? And so from there on, actually, the focus was always on how were we going to eliminate poverty from the face of India. So therefore, and growth even in the planning committee or the Congress committee of 1938, really growth was seen as that instrument, right? So you can read the Discovery of India, very nice discussion of what those deliberations were. And so Nehru writes there that our objective, we are not discussing planning completely in vacuum. We had to have an objective, and that objective was the elimination of poverty. But then he also says that we discussed and we felt that India's poverty was so massive and so serious that through mere redistribution there was no way to eliminate that poverty. The pie had to grow much bigger. And he says that, we thought that to truly address this problem of poverty, we would need a jump of 600% in the GDP, but that seemed too ambitious within a short period of time. We set a goal of 300% increase in 10 years' time. As I just shown you actually in terms of per capita income, getting to that 300% jump, really, it took us nearly 50 years. We got ultimately to from 100 to 300 in about 2000, 2001. So it took a much longer time, but I give you the historical background that, and then you can look at the documents, 5-year plans, the first, second, third. Poverty removal is indeed the primary kind of objective that is stated there, and growth then is the instrument of combating poverty. So growth really was viewed as an instrument, not as an objective. Now let's come and see a bit. That gives you the trend in poverty. You'll see that in India, one thing it started doing very early on compared to any other developing country, and by a wide margin, is that we started measuring, we started conducting expenditure surveys rather early. These were improved in quality afterwards. So the quality of the earlier surveys is particularly because these are smaller samples. But nevertheless large enough, at least at the national level, to be able to credibly estimate poverty. And so what you do is, this is based on a poverty line. This is original Lakadawala poverty line, at which poverty rates are periodically, so these are annual actually surveys, these were annual surveys, and so you can see what happened. So poverty, fluctuated around some trend, but the trend itself was relatively flat. If anything, there was a direction to that trend. It was, if anything, it was a rising trend, not a declining trend. Very mildly so, but basically, it is probably not statistically significant. So it was generally no real trend in there. But and you have good weather, basically poverty declined, bad weather, poverty went up, and that's how it roughly plays out. In effect, I think the explanation is relatively simple, that when you start at a very low per capita income, then there is a lot of poverty, but if the growth in that per capita income is also relatively low, then very little actually changes. And so in effect, weather, and India starts out in 1950, about more than half of the GDP was originating in agriculture. So agriculture was very critical, and it has a huge weight. But in addition, also India was a very closed economy during this period, and that's part of the explanation why that happened, why we did not do well, to which I'll come in a minute. But as a result, so if you are a closed economy, then what happens in agriculture also determines what happens in industry and services. So if agriculture did poorly because of bad weather, industry and services also did poorly, and in effect, therefore, in drought years you'll get a rise in poverty, in better rain years you'll get a rise in poverty. Now, eventually it changed, right? So my next slide. Now I come to a little later period. So these are, as I said, larger surveys we began to do, the expenditure surveys. And what I've done is to pick 3 of these surveys. There are a total of 5 surveys between 93, 94 and 11, 12. There is another in 99, 2000 that I have left out because the survey design got changed. So unfortunately, this was an inadvertent change they ended up making, which made that survey non-comparable with the rest. So therefore, I've taken that out. And 2009-10 is too close to 11-12, so I've taken that out. So these are 3 surveys. The first 2 are separated by 11 years, 93-94 to 4-5, and the second and third are separated by 7 years. 2 points to note here. One is poverty now does decline steadily between 93-94 to 2004-5, and then between 4-5 and to 11-12 as well. So state poverty has declined. This is rural poverty on the leftmost, and then urban poverty, and total rural plus urban poverty. Individually, therefore, poverty declines in both urban and rural areas. Aggregate, of course, it does too. The second point to note is that the decline in poverty is much sharper in the second period. Remember, this is only 7-year period versus the first period is 11-year period. And yet within 7 years, actually, this is an extremely sharp decline in poverty. This is, even by international standards, that's a very, very large decline. And remember that this is the period during which per capita income is growing on average about 8.3%. So 3-4 to 11-12, it was 8.3%, of which year 3-4 was 8.1, so roughly if we average out, we remain 8.3 between 4-5 to 11-12 as well. So this is really, in the end, the connection between poverty and growth is completely inescapable. It does actually decline very rapidly. Now, as you all know, in India we don't let things go that easily, and we have all kinds of angles to the debates. So once you point out that, look, the poverty has declined here, and growth has indeed certainly been associated with very sharp decline in poverty, it always comes back that, it doesn't help certain groups, and the groups that are really disadvantaged, particularly the scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, etc., they really have been actually impoverished, and so the poor have got, somehow those who are worst off really have not benefited from this growth and all. So one needs to go back and look at what happened to the scheduled caste and tribes. Luckily, when we do the expenditure surveys, we do identify separately the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, so we can separately actually go back and estimate poverty among the evolution of poverty among the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes. So the next slide does that, exactly that. This is by social groups. You can also actually, these surveys even separate out OBCs, and I've done that. One can do that. The other backward castes also can be separated, but the pattern is no different. But you see, first the scheduled tribes, you see a decline in poverty, again sharper decline between 4-5 to 11-12, the faster growth period. Then between 1994, scheduled castes, again the decline in poverty, in fact sharper, greater decline in poverty, and then last set of bars gives you the entire population put together. Now what you'll see is that poverty starts out, of course, the highest among scheduled tribes, next is scheduled castes. So clearly poverty is higher, and when we say they are disadvantaged group, they are. Poverty rates, poverty levels are higher in those particular groups. But the decline in poverty happens within each group. In fact, the decline in poverty is the sharpest among the scheduled castes. If you measure it by percentage points decline, the percentage point decline is the sharpest actually among the scheduled castes. Less so in scheduled tribes. Now, remember, so part of the reason, of course, why the percentage point decline is the highest in scheduled castes is also because the beginning, initial level of poverty is higher among the scheduled castes. But that same thing doesn't happen for the scheduled tribes, in the sense that, among the scheduled tribes, the beginning poverty rate in 93-94 is even higher than among the scheduled castes. But the decline in poverty in scheduled tribes is less than the decline in poverty in scheduled castes. There is something quite different about the tribes. One fact is simply that the scheduled tribes are much more rural than scheduled castes are. Scheduled castes are divided like the rest of the population is divided between rural and urban areas. But scheduled tribes are much more concentrated in rural areas. And then within rural areas also, they tend to be more kind of removed from the mainstream of the society and therefore the economy. And so the impact of growth is slower and less intense to filter down to the scheduled tribes than to the scheduled castes. So that is the pattern you see. Along the same lines, you can also do it by religion, and you'll see, again, poverty declines across all groups: Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, Jainism, Sikhism, and all of them taken together. So the phenomenon is clearly, once growth sets in, it does actually, as a group at least. Now, within each group there may be individuals who are left worse off or who are left behind and all. But if you take the group as a whole, there is no question, it steadily does decline. The last one I'll show you is by the states. So these are the large states, about I think 18 or 21. But every single state actually does experience the decline in poverty. So it is not as if poverty actually declined only in certain pockets. If you take any major group, actually, you see. So growth really, this whole euphemism or cynicism one has that somehow, there's a trickle down and therefore growth doesn't help the poor, turns out to be quite wrong. I actually prefer to use a different terminology. I say, it's a pull-up effect, not trickle down. That when growth, happens at 8%, 9%, it is a very powerful, effective engine, and it does pull everybody up by the bootstraps. Now, one last point, why and how it works. That's the okay. Why rapid growth works actually, so there are two mechanisms through which growth works. One is that this is what I call the pull-up effect, and what it does is it either creates gainful employment, but also what it does is to raise the wages across the board. And so both the improved employment prospects, which also help push the wages up, the wages rise, employment opportunities rise, and that raises the incomes of the people, and so they are themselves able to better access other amenities also. Insofar as there is private education, private health, they are able to access that. That helps, but also what for a long time people ignored is that for the government to actually effectively do redistribution, also ultimately it must be done through tax revenues. And if you are really starting very poor, no matter how hard you try, your tax revenues can't be a whole lot. So when you want to redistribute, there is not enough revenues to do redistribution in tax, redistribution programs. But once your incomes rise to a certain level, as incomes rise at least, but that doesn't mean, these private expenditures on health could rise, because incomes went up of the people. India spends about 4.5% of the GDP on health, of which about 3% is spent by the people. It is private expenditure on health, and the remaining 1.2% is by the state, by the public. But so at least the total expenditures on health could also actually rise, not from the government, but from the people. So in effect, also once you get to the social spending, in the end, it matters whether you're growing or not. Now, having done this, I'll briefly, just say, I think I'm sort of have about 5 minutes left. Am I right? We started at 2:15, let's say 2:20, so I'll probably another 10 minutes. Okay, let me just say there's not enough time to elaborate on this, but I think it needs to be said, and I'll also need, both why growth did not happen and what we need to do in the future to sustain faster growth. Very briefly, I think, in the end, as I said, the objective-wise, what we were pursuing, which is the elimination of poverty or certainly reduction in poverty, our objectives were correct. The instrument was also correct, that growth had to happen for poverty to decline. Where we actually goofed really is that effectively we adopted a model of growth which simply did not deliver growth. So in the end, it's not that growth failed India, but growth failed to happen in India. And so, as one visiting economist in the 60s said, that the problem in India was, this was 1960s, that there were too many people to whom you needed to redistribute, and too few from whom you could redistribute, and so you couldn't take redistribution very far. But what we did was to constrain the economic activity in all kinds of ways, and simply did not allow the entrepreneurial talents of India to come to fruition. So in effect, on the international trade side, we adopted a very anti-trade policy. Almost everything was subject to import licensing, and in effect, we completely outlawed the imports of all consumer goods. So I remember, now the quality of the pens that I'm getting here is absolutely superb. But when we used to use these fountain pens in the 60s and early 70s, before I left India, our running joke used to be that these are fountain pens, but they work more like fountains than like pens. The ink leaked all over. This was but what happened was that we did two things. One, we said that no consumer goods imports are allowed to be imported. So you didn't even know what the best quality pens were. Occasionally, occasionally one or two Chinese pens would slip out, and then you'll see, oh, these are much better pens and all. But effectively, you didn't even know what technological change, what was happening around the world. But also, in addition, almost all consumer goods, effectively all light manufacturers, which is all consumer goods practically, got put. But even some of the not so light manufacturers like refrigerators, etc. So not refrigerators, but most of the light consumer goods anyway, light manufacturers got put on this list called the small scale industries reservation list. What that meant was that only small enterprises which invested, less than 10 million, I think 10 million rupees is an overstatement. Less than 10 million rupees you were investing. That was the scale that was permitted. At that scale, nobody could meet any quality. You're basically serving your local market there. And so even the local manufacturing became very low quality, because with such a small scale, all you are doing is serving your local market, and the competition was simply not there. Then generates certain competition. But in addition, whatever learning that happens from knowing what the rest of the world is doing simply did not happen. And then, of course, there was this whole machinery of investment licensing. That any bigger investment you wanted to do, you have to get a license from the government, right? So we allowed license in automobiles to only two companies. There was Fiat and there was Ambassador, because nobody else was allowed to enter, there was no fear of competition on part of either of the two manufacturers. The result was that the 1980s Ambassador car was about the same as 1950s Ambassador car. There's no change in the quality that happened actually. You could pretty much see the two were nearly identical. And so quality suffered very badly, but also growth suffered on the whole, because a lot of the dynamism really comes from competing against the best in the world. So really, if you want to be world-class academic, you've got to really define your peer group as the world, as the global, not just in Delhi, or not just in India. If you are really operating, the even better analogy is cricket, right? If you're going to play Test cricket, the country as a whole, it will bring you, repeatedly people like Tendulkar and Kohli. But if you don't play Test cricket and say, I'm just going to play Ranji Trophy, or I just localized clubs. And simply, an occasional one will come, of course, because Ramanujam would always appear, who would become a world-class mathematician by sheer virtue of the skill that the player or the mathematician is born with. But largely, I think, as a matter of routine, will not produce world-class cricket players unless you're playing test cricket. In the same way with any products that you produce, entrepreneurship, etc., unless you are really competing against the best in the world, you'll simply not do as well. And that's roughly the story why we were left behind. I've taken a very quick shortcut to tell you that. But that we changed finally in 1991, began to change. There were lots of restrictions, and we are still struggling to remove many of the unnecessary regulations that are in the way of the entrepreneurship and in the way of the competition. But still a big change started happening from 1991. The import licensing was done away with, the investment licensing was done away with, we opened the economy to trade, we opened the economy to foreign investment, and in general, the environment became much more competitive, began to compete globally. Just one measure of the change that happened, in 2002, our exports were merchandise exports were only 50 billion. By 2012, we were exporting $300 billion worth of goods, a 6 times leap in less than 10 years' time, or about 10 years' time. That is a phenomenal growth that we achieved. And this is growth in exports from 50 billion in 2002 to 300 billion in 2012. So I think big changes have happened, and that is where we need to continue. I think there's a whole, so in the present government, then policy. So we did actually, 2004. So there's a period of 5 years with Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, which really where the pioneering reforms happened. Under Atal Bihari Prime Minister Vajpayee, again there was a 5-year period, about 98 to 2003. Major reforms happened. Then I think we again fell back. A lot of the reforms came to a standstill. For 10 years, very little was done, and in the end, that did result in the growth declining. That was the 2 years where growth actually, based on the old series, new series growth is a little higher than that, but effectively growth did decline. We are back actually to about 7% now. A lot of the momentum is being gathered back on the economic reform side. Quite a few things have happened. Not enough time to tell you what has been done. Maybe we can take up in Q&A. But looking ahead, I personally think that over the next 15 years, really what we have to do is what China did in the last 15 years. China in 1999 was a $2 trillion economy by my calculation, and today it's about 11 trillion. I think we can actually do the same thing. We can, from about 2.1 trillion today, go by 2032 to about a $10.5 trillion economy. That require about 8% growth in real rupees, with appreciation of the rupee that usually comes with rapid growth. You could, in dollar terms, you can get another 2%, so about 10% in real dollars. That actually gets you from roughly the current level of 2.1 to 10 trillion by 2032. I think that is the objective towards which we ought to work, and certainly the present government is committed to that.